Yugoslavia was destructing it in front of your eyes with horrible, horrible civil conflict. Um, and NATO was the only unified military structure available to Europe to deal with this. So NATO's mission changed. It became not a defensive alliance, but it became a offensively oriented security alliance, where NATO was now deployed into Yugoslavia, NATO forces. And then later on, NATO was involved in an offensive regime change oriented action against Serbia, where NATO did something or NATO participated in something that Europeans said they would never again do, the redrawing of the European map. One of the key aspects at the end of the Second World War is we don't mess with the maps, man. We drew the lines. We gave a chunk of Poland to Ukraine, and we gave a chunk of Germany to Poland, and now the lines are solid. We don't renegotiate. Because the second you start erasing the lines, the Germans are going to start saying, remember those Germans I told you about, that Silesia is Germany, that Prussia is Germany. Maybe we need to march, east again and take them over. It's the last thought you want to enter any German's mind. But it's the last thought you want to enter, but we did it. NATO did it in Kosovo. And since then, NATO's expanded eastward in violation of every assurance they gave to the former Soviet leaders and also to the new Russian leaders, Boris Yeltsin. The conversations between Clinton and Yeltsin are stunning to listen to how dismissive the United States is of Russia concerns about NATO expansion. That this is purely, don't worry about it. It's benevolent. We're here to do good things. Really, ask the Serbs about that. And then you have a situation where a new Russian leader comes in, Vladimir Putin, and almost immediately he reiterates, "Hey, we're not happy about this NATO expansion. This is a threat to Russia. We have to ask you, why are you expanding? If it's about European security, then let us in. Let us join. Because if we join, then we're not going to be afraid of what your real intent is. But right now it looks like you're coming right up to our borders with an aggressive, militarized alliance that has carried out regime change not only in Serbia, where they got rid of Slobodan Milosevic, but in Libya, where they got rid of Muammar Gaddafi. I mean, this is not a defensive alliance anymore. This is an offensive-oriented alliance, and I'm a little worried, Putin was thinking, about the rhetoric coming out of Washington, D.C. and Europe about how maybe you don't like the fact that I'm president and you want somebody like Boris Yeltsin to be president again, a weak president, and maybe you want to put pressure on Russia to have my system collapse, remove me, and replace me. A little worrisome. One of the best speeches ever given in the last 3 decades was the 2007 speech given by Putin at the Munich Security Conference. Read it. Not just the speech, but the questions, the answers that he gives to the questions afterwards. He put it right on the line. This is unacceptable, this expansion of NATO. Unacceptable to Russia. We view it as a threat. And yet, what did NATO do? In 2008 in Bucharest, they offered a membership application to Ukraine and Georgia, 2 former Soviet republics. How did Russia feel about that? Well, we don't even have to ask the Russians, although we know. Why don't we ask William Burns, the U.S. ambassador to Moscow, who wrote a memorandum called Niet means Niet, no means no, in February of 2009, where he said this is a red line for Russia, and that if the United States continues to insist on NATO expansion to include Ukraine, Russia will have no choice but to go to war. This is 2009. So people need to understand that what's happening today is not something new. This isn't Vladimir Putin waking up one morning going, oh man, I'm a little irritated, I'm going to invade Ukraine. This because. No, and it's worse. In 2014, the United States and the European Union orchestrated a regime change operation in Ukraine to get rid of the duly elected president, Yanukovych, and replace him with our boys. I'm not making this up. This is Victoria Nuland, who was at the time a senior State Department person who got on the phone and said, Yatsenko, future prime minister of Ukraine, he's our boy. And was this something that the United States was working in concert with the European Union? No. Remember what Victoria Nuland infamously said? F the EU. I won't use the real word, but F the EU. You guys know what I'm talking about. That was her dismissive attitudes towards Europe. This was an American orchestrated regime change operation in Ukraine for the sole purpose of undermining the authority and the legitimacy and the sustainability of Vladimir Putin's regime in Moscow. That's how the Russians saw it, because that's how it was. Russia's got the receipts, man. They got the intercepted conversations. They got everything. They know everything. But the West is ignorant. No, no, no. This is just sort of the expression of democracy in Ukraine. It's the people's will. Well, no, it was actually the people's will being hijacked by a very virulent, aggressive, neo-Nazi Ukrainian nationalist identity coming out of Lvov, operating under the memory of a guy named Stepan Bandera. Stepan Bandera is a Ukrainian nationalist who is operating in the 1930s, 40s, 50s. This is a guy who believes in the purity of the Ukrainian people. He cooperated with Nazi Germany during World War II. People talk about, for instance, the Babi Yar, infamous murder of 30,000 plus Jews. Ordered by the Germans, the triggermen were Ukrainians working for Stepan Bandera. People need to remember this. These aren't good people, these Ukrainian nationalists. They're Nazis. 80,000 of them joined the German forces immediately after the Germans entered. Over 250,000 ended up fighting for Germany during World War II. 250,000 Ukrainians fighting for Nazi Germany during World War II, motivated by the nationalism of Stepan Bandera. Now, when Germany lost the war, Stepan Bandera, being the Ukrainian nationalist that he is, jumped ship and went rogue, fought his own operation against now the Soviet occupiers. Who supported this? Well, during World War II, Bandera was supported by an organization, I think it was called the 12th Directorate, basically the German intelligence in the East, on the Eastern Front, run by a general named Gehlen. When the war ended, the Gehlen organization was taken over completely by the United States and incorporated into the CIA structure to continue anti-Soviet resistance. Nazi Germany was defeated by American troops and Soviet troops, but we took the Nazi intelligence organization in the East, made it part of our intelligence organization so we could continue to fight the Russians. And they did for 10 years with CIA funding. Over 300,000 people lost their lives in that conflict. 100,000 Poles and a lot of Russians and a lot of Ukrainians. When you say, why Poles, why Russians? Because Ukrainians are racist. Stepan Bandera is a Ukrainian nationalist who views the Poles and the Russians as subhumans, and they needed to purify Ukrainian soil from these subhuman elements. I'm not making this up. It's all documented fact. Documented fact. The atrocities that they committed are mind-boggling. But this is the ideology that moved in on the Maidan. You see, because even though they were defeated militarily around 1954, the CIA continued to fund them from 1954 to 1990, fund their political activities, including not just the activities inside Ukraine, but also the activities of the immigrant populations that came to the United States and in Canada. So you have very strong Banderist organizations, movements in the United States and Canada, which are promoting this notion of Ukrainian nationalism, trying to clean it up, because nobody likes to admit that. You want to make a Ukrainian uncomfortable? Ask them what Grandpa was doing between 1936 and 1954. They'll start shrugging and getting nervous because they don't want to admit Grandpa was killing Jews, Grandpa was killing Poles, Grandpa was killing Russians, Grandpa was a murderer, because that's what he was. But now they cleaned it up. It's purely Ukrainian nationalism, they got away with it from 1990 when the Soviet Union started to move on. Ukrainian independence came up until 2014. But in 2014, Ukrainian nationalism raised its ugly head. It came to the Maidan, took over a peaceful demonstration, turned it violent, evicted Yanukovych, and then used the threat of force. Even though they're a political minority, these nationalists, they were able to expand their influence through the threat of force. And they bullied their way into power. They took over the Interior Ministry. They took over the police force. They created these volunteer units of thugs who went down to Odessa, for instance, and burned to death 46 Russians, burn or smoke inhalation that they crowded into the Union of Trade building. They went to Mariupol, where they carried out brutal street fighting against the Russian majority population there, seizing control of that city, establishing their headquarters there. That's why this Nazi movement in Germany is called the Azov Regiment. Sea of Azov is the body of water next to Mariupol. Mariupol is a Russian city, but the Azov movement, these Nazis came down and put their headquarters in Azov, basically saying, we're in control. Then they set their eyes on the Donbass. They started to make a move on Donetsk and Lugansk and the Russian populations there, who stood up and finally said enough is enough, and they started fighting. That led to 8 years of incessant warfare between the Russian, what we call separatists, because we don't want to be part of Ukraine that seeks to murder us, and Ukrainian nationalists. Now, the interesting thing is, people say, well, these were volunteer units. We brought them into the military, so they're not as bad as people think. Imagine in the United States, the Ku Klux Klan. Those white guys that wear the sheets and run around, burn crosses. Good people, stand-up Americans. Imagine if all the Ku Klux Klan thugs in the South got together and formed a militia battalion. And then the U.S. Army went, oh, we're just going to invite you in. We're going to bring you into the U.S. Army intact. And you get to do whatever you want to do. You can burn crosses, wear the stuff. It's okay, but now we control you. The U.S. Army just became a racist institution because it allows a racist unit inside. The Ukrainian military, by allowing the Nazi military organizations to be incorporated intact, became a Nazi unit. It's impossible to say otherwise. And now these officers are now permeate throughout the Ukrainian military. Remember, these are the frontline troops. These are the heroes. They're fighting the Russians, the orcs. That's what the Ukrainians call the Russians, the orcs. They're subhumans. And so this is the conflict that's going on. And now they control everything. They put pressure on Ukrainian political leaders. They put pressure on Poroshenko, the president before Zelensky, saying that if you implement policies that we disagree with, we will Maidan you. Remember that term, Maidan, Kiev? That means that you're going to ransack his office, which they did. They mean they're going to threaten to kill him, which they did. And then when he was voted out and Zelensky came in, they did the same thing to Zelensky. There's a videotape out there of a senior Azov regiment official saying that if Zelensky signs the Minsk agreements, which is the peace accord negotiated under the Normandy format with Germany, France, participating, he signs it, we will hang him by the neck, kill him in the streets of Kiev. Now, normally when someone says that about a sitting president, security services sweep in and remove them because they committed a crime threatening the president. No, because the security service is the Azov movement, is the neo-Nazis. And today we have a situation where Zelensky is totally under the control of this odious Nazi ideology. All of Ukraine is. They saran wrap citizens to poles, pull down their pants, beat them, paint their faces green, call them orcs. They interrogate anybody who has a Russian background. They murder many of them. They terrorize their own people. And this is who we're defending.